Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. In this episode, we're going to be talking about making pottery glazes. And when you're working with any powders in pottery, powdered rocks, powdered clays, ashes, you must always use an FFP3 face mask to protect your lungs. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and today's episode is actually an episode I recorded a while ago, but I thought actually now would be a really good time to release it. And it's all about making glazes from leaves. And although it might not seem like so basically it's spring in the UK, in the northern hemisphere it's spring, and this is an ideal time to be looking at plants like identify them basically. So you can identify them with their leaves and their flowers, and the whole point of this is that you can identify the plant ready for when they drop their leaves in the autumn, and then you'll be able to make pottery glazes from fallen leaves. So that's what I thought. Let's release it now, and then you can identify those plants, and then in the autumn, or maybe you're living in the southern hemisphere and you have loads of autumn leaves already. I thought, what a great time to release this episode now. So yeah, 13 reasons to make pottery glazes from fallen leaves, and here we go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about creating a pottery glaze with ash that's made from fallen leaves from plants. Okay. So, in a few, another couple of episodes, I'm going to be talking to you about how I actually make a leaf ash glaze. Um, and if you want to read more about leaf ash glazing in general, I've written a book on the topic, Leaf Ash Glazing, A Guide to Sustainable Pottery Glazing with Fallen Leaves, which is available on the Oxford Clay website. But in today's episode, I wanted to sort of just talk to you a bit about like what leaf ash glazing actually is, but also 13 amazing reasons why leaf ash glazing is absolutely brilliant for potters. It's fantastic to use in pottery. Okay, so let's get started. So I'll start at the beginning. Basically, so like you can actually make a pottery glaze from the ashes of plants. And traditionally in pottery, wood has been used as the ash, as a source of ash for glazes, right? So there's a mineral composition of ash when it's created from plants that is absolutely perfect to use in pottery glazes. And what happens is when ash is burned to very, very high temperatures, when it's heated to very, very high temperatures, the ash actually melts into a pottery glaze. And the very simplest form of pottery glaze made from ash is actually just clay and ash and water. And then that creates a pottery glaze. And that's what people used to do, thousands of years ago when they first discovered that you could actually make a pottery glaze from ash. That's the kind of technique they were using. And then gradually it evolved to kind of different recipes where so potters were kind of combining different crushed rocks with ash and water to create like beautiful pottery glazes. And that's what that's what like leaf ash glazing is all about. But it's specifically about creating pottery glazes with the leaves of plants that have fallen naturally. Um, so, at the end of their growing cycle, leaves will fall, and then you can actually collect these as a potter, burn them into an ash, and then use this ash in glaze recipes. So anytime you see an ash glaze recipe, so there's whole books that have been written on sort of ash glazing, and they've got different recipes, lots of different recipes. And actually, leaf ash glazing just uses one recipe, and then it's sort of changing the ash each time, the type of leaf used each time. But if you read a book on ash glazing, you see different ash glazing recipes, and it's saying like wood ash. You can substitute that wood ash for ash made with leaves, with fallen leaves, and that's absolutely fine. So often leaves actually make really beautiful glazes. So they're like fantastic to use in pottery glazes. They often have like more sort of naturally occurring like trace metals in, so they can often create like sort of subtle colors, where wood ash glazes can do the same thing, but they're often quite like more like kind of transparent, whereas like the leaves of plants can often create like beautiful colors. So yes, that's all about leaf ash glazing. Um, and what we'll do is we'll talk about 13 amazing reasons why leaf ash glazing is fantastic for potters. So yeah, so this is actually in the book, Leaf Ash Glazing. So which is available from the Oxford Clay website and also Amazon. But I'll just talk you through these 13 amazing reasons. Because yeah, like I said, leaf ash glazing is such a fantastic resource for potters. Leaves are abundant, available, and we can use these in our pottery to make like beautiful glazes. So okay, so pottery reasons. Okay, so the first one is that it connects you to an ancient pottery practice. So people have been ash glazing. Historians think that they've been ash glazing for about 3,500 years. So that's when the first kind of like evidence emerged of people using ash in pottery glazes. So it connects you to this absolutely ancient tradition of glazing, and it's really nice to think that you're kind of doing such an ancient pottery practice when you're practicing it. um, the next reason is that often ash glaze recipes are very simple, and that's because generally speaking, the ash is such a complex ingredient that you can just combine it with like a couple of different rocks. So, for example, the recipe used in Leaf Ash Glazing book is only quartz, Cornish stone, and ash, and then water. Because ash is such a complex ingredient containing so many different kind of minerals and trace metals, you can create glazes with like minimal ingredients. So if you're kind of just, you want to just a very simple recipe to sort of think like, oh, I want to maybe start practicing like making a stoneware glaze. Ash glazing is a really good option because they're often like extremely simple, and the ingredients are very common, like easy to source. Like you can source ash yourself, create the ash yourself, and then it's just a couple of other rocks that are crushed that you can get from pottery suppliers really easily. So the third reason is that you can create many, many different and very unique glazes. So, like, I think this is actually a reason. The kind of the flip side of this is that sometimes it's ash glazing can be like quite unpredictable. So, for example, you're using you could be maybe using the same type of plant, but it's grown in different areas. It can actually create different looking glazes because the composition of the soil in those two different areas will cause the composition of the tissues in the plant, the leaves and the wood and stuff. When it's burned, it might actually contain a different mineral and trace metal composition to each other, even though they're the same species of plant. So, so like the other side of that coin is that it can actually make like create really, really unique and special glazes that are, very like you wouldn't really be able to create them otherwise. So that's a really amazing thing for potters to be able to like just create like such a kind of unique and special glaze to use in their work, but also very easily because the ingredients are very easy to source and it's very simple. So, the fourth reason is that ash glazes are actually usually really high in flux. So, flux is a substance in a glaze. So, ash has it like naturally occurring that will help the glaze to kind of melt in the kiln. So, the really good thing about using ash glazes that high in flux, naturally high in flux, is that you can use them with colouring oxides. They work really, really well with colouring oxides. So basically, you can just add a little bit of a colouring oxide onto a pot which you've glazed with an ash glaze. So you're adding the colouring oxide, say like on top, and it will really mix with that glaze just naturally in the kiln and create like a really beautiful colour. So I actually make my own metal oxide, my own verdigris, which is copper oxide, myself by oxidizing copper. And if you want to learn how to do that, it's in the Eco Conscious Pottery book, which is on the Oxford Clay website or on Amazon as well. Um, and it just goes through like how to actually do that. So I use like you can use just any kind of copper or even brass actually, and you can oxidize it yourself with like vinegar and salt, and it creates this like beautiful sort of bluey green powder that you can then use as an oxide yourself. So yeah, so particularly like, recycled metals, you could even use rust. If you're just scraping off a little bit of rust, you can use that as a kind of iron oxide, but be very careful when working with rust that you don't cut yourself and get rust in it. But it can cause like tetanus. But you can use rust, you can use verdigris copper oxide with ash glazes, with the leaf ash glazes, and they just create like absolutely beautiful effects because of that naturally occurring flux. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. Okay, so reason number 5 is that leaves are a free and absolutely abundant glaze making ingredient. So those leaves are going to be like naturally renewing every growing cycle. They're freely available. They're often just found around like pavements, parks. Obviously, ask permission from the person if you're collecting them off someone's land or something. But you can find leaves just on the pavement, like here in the UK in the autumn, we just have like leaves everywhere, like lots of tree-lined streets and stuff. They're just dropping, the trees are just dropping their leaves, and you can just find them in public walkways, public pavements. They are so abundant at that time of year, and they're freely available for you to collect to make into a leaf ash glaze. Um, okay, so the next section I've entitled environmental reasons, and that's because this particular book, Leaf Ash Glazing, has a kind of environmental focus. Because yeah, well, let's go through the reasons, and I'll tell you more. So the first thing is that, so this is reason number 6. Leaf ash can be locally sourced. So think about like the international kind of trade of pottery materials. Many pottery materials are mined, different parts of the earth. You might be in another part of the globe, and you're having to kind of source those materials, and you're having to transport them to you to make your pottery. Whereas if you're creating leaf ash, the recipe I use in the book, Leaf Ash Glazing, is 40% leaf ash, and then 40% Cornish stone, and then 20% quartz. That 40% of that glaze, the leaf ash, you're locally sourcing from leaves that are abundantly available near you. You're creating that yourself. So basically zero transport costs. You might have walked to get those leaves. I mean, you might have taken transport to get those leaves. I don't know, but it's really, really cutting down on that kind of the carbon emissions from the transportation of the leaves. You're collecting yourself. Yeah, you're collecting them yourself, really cutting down on the transportation of that pottery material. So, reason number 7 is that plants' leaves are actually a renewable source of pottery material. Now, this, I'm going to say, I think this is like my favorite reason of all, because if you think about other pottery materials, they're mined from the earth. They're often rocks. They've often taken millions of years to form. If the case of in the case of clay, that's taken millions of years to form. We're using those materials up, and when we're creating pottery, we're taking them from the earth and we're creating something else. But our pottery. But that's essentially it's a non-renewable source of pottery materials because of the length of time those materials have taken to form. So that it's essentially exactly sort of in the same way as like a fossil fuel, for example, takes millions of years to form. This is the same with rocks and clays, so that we use in pottery. So the really brilliant thing about using leaf ash in glazes, is that that material, 40% of that glaze is going to be from a renewable source. So plants are constantly growing these leaves. They're constantly shedding them as part of their natural growing cycle, just collecting them off the pavement or wherever, park. And then we're making glazes out of them. So it's constantly renewing, and it's a renewable source of a glaze making material. So um like that sort of follows on to reason number 8, which is that using ash in glazes actually reduces our dependence on mined materials. So reduces our dependence as a whole, as an industry, handmade pottery industry. It reduces our dependence on mining. We're using less mined materials. That's a good thing for the earth. We're going to be using less energy to mine those materials, and those materials, they then, like I said, non-renewable, and so we're reducing our dependency on them. Um, yeah, I mean, there are several problems with mining. Mining can create pollution. It can create, especially in the sense of, especially in the case of metal oxides. They create a lot of pollution when they're mined. We're having to use a lot of energy to mine them. Often mining companies are having to go like deeper. The ore is less high grade, and that's creating even more pollution. It's using even more energy. Often mined materials are transported by diesel transportation, and so there's a lot of like energy and potential air pollution, CO2 emissions that's caused by mining, that we can reduce if we're using that part of a glaze as like ash, as leaf ash, renewable sources. Renewable source of glazing ingredient. So, okay, the reason number 9 is that this is in terms of using leaves rather than wood ash in a glaze, is that leaves actually create more ash than wood does. So, I actually I actually weighed out each type of leaf before I burned it, and then I weighed it again after I burned it in this book, and I put it all into a table so you can see the percentage of each type of leaf and how much ash each one created. Um, so that's with 36 different leaves that I tested in this book. So basically, the amount before, like the weight before when it was a dry leaf, and then weighed it afterwards, and then created a percentage from that. So what I found was that leaves generally create from 5 to 15% of their dry weight in ash. So, say for example, you've got 100 grams of leaves, potentially you're getting 15 grams of ash out of that. Whereas wood actually only creates 0.5 percent of its weight before burning into ash after burning. So you can see that, like, in a way, it's just kind of easier for you as a potter, better for you. You should be collecting leaves because you're just getting more ash, and you can then, create that ash like into a glaze. It's just you're just having to use less of the plant. Basically, it's parts of the plant they don't need anymore, and that's what you're creating your glaze out of. It's just like, yeah, you need to create less. You need to collect less to create this more ash. So that's great all round. Okay, so reason number 10 is that using plant leaf ash prevents erosion caused by deforestation. And this is the idea that, like, if you're using, say, like for example, wood in a pottery glaze, that tree might have been felled to create that wood, and then you're burning it, creating your pottery glaze. I mean, obviously you can use recycled wood. recycled sorry, ash that say like from a wood burning stove or something, that's wood that's being used to like heat someone's home, and then you're just collecting that ash and you're recycling it. So that's that is an option definitely. But by collecting leaves, just the leaves, you're not damaging the plant. You're basically just collecting those fallen leaves that the plant doesn't need anymore, that the tree doesn't need, and so you're protecting the earth from deforestation. If you completely remove that plant, the soil is like it's not held by the plant's roots anymore, and so you're basically avoiding that issue by using just the leaves that the plant doesn't need anymore, the fallen leaves. Okay, reason number 11 is that leaf ash glazes are a more environmentally sustainable way to colour pottery. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but um, basically, leaves often contain naturally occurring trace metals, and these metals will just add a really subtle color to your pottery glaze made from leaves naturally without having to add any metal oxides that have been commercially mined, or you've had to recycle metal into. So it adds like a really beautiful natural color. And so they're not bright colors, but they do add like beautiful kind of like light greens, like yellows, kind of light browns. Sometimes you get a sort of lovely bluey white color, a bit like a kind of rutile glaze. Yeah, I've had like light purples before. So it's a really good way of not having to use any commercially mined metal oxides in your pottery, and just adding that color naturally just from those natural minerals, trace metals that have been brought up by the plant from the soil. Yeah, so that this is a really environmentally sustainable way to color your pottery. And then the last two reasons are well-being reasons, and this is to do with really being out and about, like foraging for leaves. So, so reason number 12 is that being in nature is really good for you, and there's so many studies that have been done on sort of the benefits of like being out in nature, and collecting leaves is a great excuse just to be out and about. Like looking at different plants. Identifying them, just being like in the fresh air, like being amongst like in a forest, or being amongst plants, being in a park. It's so good for your well-being. Yeah, and in the book I sort of talk briefly about a couple like studies that have been done to show that like being in nature can positively impact your immune system, and yeah, and it's actually prescribed by doctors in Japan. um, Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is often prescribed by doctors for patients suffering from depression, stress, and overwhelm. So there are so many good reasons to be like out collecting leaves. And then reason number 13 is that foraging is a natural activity for humans. So as humans, we've been foraging, out collecting food, building materials, just out in nature, like collecting, foraging for things for thousands of years. And so I really love this quote actually. Like I read this really brilliant book on foraging, which is called Wild Magic: A Seasonal Guide to Foraging with Healing Recipes and Self-Care Rituals, by an author called Fern Freud, which, yeah, I'd really recommend it actually. It's just kind of like, that's where I kind of got this really cool foraging fact from as well. It's all about sort of foraging different things to eat and stuff. Yeah, so Fern Freud says that if the whole of human history was condensed into one day, we only stopped foraging around an hour and 20 minutes ago, which is just like incredible, isn't it? Just shows like, so we're really naturally predispositioned to be like out, like our bodies have evolved to like roam the land and to gather things from the earth, like gather things out in the wild. So yeah, so so number 13, so gathering leaves for glaze making just brings us back to that natural state, which just feels so good to us, like being out and about and like collecting leaves. Um, yeah, so those are the 13 reasons which I think make glazing with leaves, with leaf ash, just absolutely brilliant for potters. I've loved talking to you about it, about all the different reasons, and um Yeah, like I said, if you're interested to know more about glazing with leaves, you can get the book Leaf Ash Glazing from the Oxford Clay website. It's on there for you or Amazon as well. And yeah, wishing you very happy potting until the next episode of the Oxford Clay podcast. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you then. And I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.